Scenario number 1. You're sitting, just chilling, and you get that fateful message from a customer asking you to do something new and exciting that you've never done before. Scenario number 2. You're just chilling, minding your own business, when your white, boring, plain old shoes catch your eye and you decide, I'm gonna do something epic or awesome on this pair of shoes. Unfortunately, in both of these scenarios, you end up with your head in your hands crying because you don't have the necessary machinery in order to make awesome custom sneaker stencils. But don't cry, my friend, there need not be only these two options. There is a third option.
Murder.
The third option is to watch the rest of this video, in which I am going to teach you how to make amazing custom sneaker stencils from the comfort of your home without any special machinery or vinyl cutting machines. And literally all you're going to need to get started is a screen, a pen, and some masking tape. Oh well, you don't believe me? Well then keep watching. Oh well, you do believe me? Well, keep watching anyway. Now before you click off this video thinking that stencils are only for people who airbrush or spray and that there's nothing here for you if you are just using a brush, don't leave. This technique is perfectly usable for those who paint by hand, those who spray paint, and those who airbrush. Now at this point I'll mention that there are two different types of stencils. For simplicity's sake, I'll give them my own names. There is a mask and there is a negative stencil. A mask stencil is when you use a specific shape in order to block off a certain area so that no paint gets on it. Then the second type, the negative stencil, is the exact opposite. If I only wanted to work on the robot itself and not affect the background at all, I would use my masking tape to block off any areas that I didn't want the paint to get on. So you see, it really depends on exactly what you want to accomplish. Now that that description is out of the way, let's get to making some stencils. So the first thing you want to do is you want to copy the image that you want to create a stencil from over onto your phone or your tablet. I find it extremely helpful to put this image onto a shoe template or mock-up so that you can get the sizing perfectly right. If you want to learn more about how to create shoe mock-ups and the relevant link to get that kind of a template, click on the link in the description below or this little tag over here and it'll take you to a video that explains all of that quite nicely. If you don't want to bother with a mock-up, there is a way to measure exactly what size your stencil needs to be by using the shoe itself. I'm going to teach you a very easy little trick. So what you do is you take your shoe and you take a pencil and you decide exactly what size you want your stencil to take up by taking the end of the pencil and using your thumb or a piece of masking tape to determine exactly the height at its highest point. What you'll do is you'll take this measurement and you'll take it onto your tablet or your phone and size the image according to this allocation. That way you'll know that your stencil is going to fit perfectly on your shoe. Once you've got that perfect size, do your best not to touch your screen with your hands from this point onwards. If you accidentally touch your screen, move the image or resize it while you're busy creating your stencil in the next couple of steps, you may need to stop and start again. The next step is to take your masking tape. I prefer white masking tape because it allows light to shine through it best. And you lay down several slightly overlapping layers of masking tape on your screen that completely covers the area that you want your stencil to be in. I always make sure that the tape completely overlaps the edges of the device that I'm using, and you'll see why in just a little bit. Sometimes with other colors of masking tape that are not white or yellow, like red or orange or green, it can be a little bit more difficult to see details through your screen. But for any color tape, I like to close the blinds and turn off all lights and make it as dark as possible in the room to allow whatever image to shine through my tape as strongly as possible. Personally, I think this makes a huge difference. Next, you want to take a ballpoint pen and carefully trace the outside or the outer edge of whatever you want to create as your stencil. I highly recommend using pen rather than a pencil because sometimes the graphite smudges onto the surface of your shoe as you're placing the stencil down, and we don't want anything to mess with our excellent surface preparation. Then once you're done doing your careful outline of your shape, you can turn the lights back on and admire your handiwork. Now, if you were a complete psychopath, you could use your X-Acto knife and cut the pieces you wanted directly off of your screen. But I'm going to assume that you're not a complete psychopath and teach you how to do it without destroying your screen. What we're going to do is we're going to remove this demarcated masking tape and transfer it onto a cutting mat and do the cutting there. Now the second you start trying to pull this tape up, you're going to find that the individual pieces of tape that are overlapping are going to want to come up separately, which is a bad situation. Now I love this is my favorite part. What you're going to want to do is take a piece of tape vertically over the ends of all of your pieces of tape and fold it over like so. This is kind of going to give you like a little bit of a handle to get all of your pieces to come up consistently. You're definitely going to want to do this on one side, but you can do it on both sides if you'd prefer. Then you're going to carefully pull up your tape using your new handles and move over to a cutting mat. And if you don't have a cutting mat, you could use any glass surface like a coffee table. And you're going to carefully smoothen down the tape from one side to the other, making sure that it is even and that there are no bubbles at all. You're going to take your X-Acto knife and you're going to go over that line that you created when you were drawing with your ballpoint pen, and you're going to cut out your stencil. This step can take quite a bit of time and give you quite a bit of neck strain, so I would recommend considering the complexity of the shape that you're going to create your mask from before doing it. Say if you're trying to create a stencil of a tree, you might not want to do a stencil that requires you to cut out every single leaf individually. But that really does just come up to the amount of patience you have. Next, you can take the tip of your knife and very carefully pull up an edge of your mask. And then, bit by bit, pull up the entire shape. Just make sure that you're looking for weak spots and start with those or do those individually so that you don't tear your tape in any places. Then, take your extricated mask and place it very carefully and gently onto the surface of the shoe. Make sure that you don't press down all together right away, just in case you need to pull it up and reposition it later. If your stencil happens to overlap on any of the different edges on, say, a shoe like a Jordan 1 or an Air Force 1, you need to take a hard flat edge like the back of a pencil or a ruler and make sure that that tape goes into those gaps. Just don't press too hard. Remember, masking tape is made out of paper, so if you press too hard you might tear the tape, and that will cause problems when painting over the stencil. And that's basically how you create a homemade stencil. But before you go away and use your stencil, there is a crucial piece of information you need to know. Because masking tape stencils are made out of paper, using thick or very wet paint can cause the paint to bleed underneath the stencil. There is a way that we can overcome this though. The best way to do this is by sealing the stencil. Now you could skip this step by taking a hairdryer and giving it a once over, making sure that the glue sticks to the shoe nicely. But you do run the risk of leaving a residue when you pull that tape up, especially with very tacky tapes. What I recommend instead is taking the base color of your shoe, for example white for an Air Force 1, and spraying or painting white in your desired area, so that if it does bleed underneath the masking tape, it won't matter. But what that will do is it would lock the stencil in place, meaning that any paints that you put over and above will not seep underneath the tape. This is a marvelous trick that's going to save you lots of touching up later down the line. Now just a quick tip, if you are using a brush rather than an airbrush or spray paints when using this technique, I recommend using as dry paint as possible. Now that might not always be possible, say you're using Angelus paints, they come quite runny. A quick way to get around that is to dip your brush in your paint and then take a piece of tissue paper and dab your paintbrush onto the tissue. This will absorb a large amount of the paint and allow you to just very lightly put whatever is left over the stencil. Again, this is just to avoid paint bleeding underneath the stencil, which is more likely when using a brush than an airbrush. But it can be avoided if you use the tips I just mentioned. Once you've done all of these cool tips, you are absolutely free to go nuts with creating stencils for gradients, for shapes, for all sorts of textures, and the application of this technique is just about as limited as your imagination. I really hope that you found this little practical guide helpful. This has been one of the most requested videos I've ever had. So all of you who wanted it, I hope that this answers your questions and allows you to create awesome custom sneaker stencils from the comfort of your home without spending money. Personally, I've done so many pairs of customs and I've used this technique on almost all of them. I'm not about to invest in a Cricut machine, even though I do see their value for precision, for lettering and typography and stuff like that. I'm still old school, I like to do things myself. If you give this a go and you had success or you had troubles, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear more about your experiences, and if there are any questions I can answer, I'd be happy to do it there. So now go out, create awesome custom stencils, make awesome custom sneakers, make yourself super happy, run for presidency, solve world hunger, and make sure you subscribe while you're at it. Until next time, see ya.